Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss another video. Please make sure you leave a like on this video, as it helps the YouTube algorithm perform at a much higher level, thus reaching my channel out to a much larger audience. If you would like to have your story featured on an upcoming video, email me at thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. Sit back, relax, enjoy these true scary stories while I scare the hell out of you. I was a lifeguard at a lake when I was in high school. Our town was very small and the lake is where all of the fun was had in the spring and summer. The town was in Southern California and the weather was always sweltering during the summers. The lake was large and there was always multiple guards on duty to survey and carefully watch over the enormous body of water. This event occurred the summer after I graduated from high school. I started my shift at 11 a.m. that day, and the lake was calm. No ripples in the water, seemed very stagnant to be honest. No wind, the trees that surrounded us were eerily silent. No birds chirping either that day. I made my first walk up and down the beach. At this early hour in the day, the beach was already starting to fill up, and I mean quickly. Everyone was trying to claim their spots before the heat of the day hit. I noticed something very strange off in the distance. There was a man lying in blue jeans and a large winter jacket. He was close to where the woods began near a section of beach. Although the lake was very large in size, much of the area was surrounded by small clusters of tree line. The man seemed to be positioned near two young girls building a sand castle. I used my binoculars to get a better look at things. The man seemed to be edging closer and closer to them minute by minute. I used my walkie-talkie to check in with another guard that was fairly close by. My coworker was able to have our supervisor cover his section of the beach so he could assist me. My last glance through my binoculars proved utterly horrifying as my eyes focused on the man in the distance. He crept up and snatched one of the little girls. I immediately blew my whistle and yelled, "Stop that man! He's trying to kidnap a child." Multiple people looked at me in horror, and my partner and I were running as fast as humanly possible to save this young girl and make sure her sister wasn't taken next. When real-life situations of shock and awe happen, people think they will always be the badass that saves the day, but in reality things play out much differently. Time slowed as I ran and saw the man scampering deeper into the brush and forest. There was a curve in the dense vegetation on the trail, and in moments he would be out of my partner and my line of sight. My lungs were burning and I felt myself slowing. I was in excellent shape at the time, but my partner caught up to me and ended up passing me. Once we had both made it around the bend in the trail, we saw nothing. Zero, no sign of either of them. I then heard two men shouting and tires screeching. We made it to a small clearing in the pines and saw a small old beat-up truck speeding away. The girl had her hands pressed against the back of the window crying and wailing. The truck had no license plate, so all we could get was the make and model of the vehicle. The lake had zero reception, so we had to run back the way we came and towards the main parking lot to try and get reception to phone 911. Sadly, we had lost so much precious time waiting to get help. It took the police 20 minutes to reach the area once we got through over the phone. The girl was dismembered and her body parts were found years later, strewn about the forested area, 10 miles from where she was taken that day. Please never leave your child alone. The ultimate price was paid that day. My youth group and I took a trip to a lake house one Sunday, August 24th, 2014, after church on Lake Bruin, Louisiana. When we got to the lake, we all jumped in, as that summer day it was almost 103 degrees. We swam and swam as the adults were getting lunch ready. Thankfully, we were getting out of the water when the current passed through the water. Out of the 16 youth that were in the water minutes ago, 4 of us were still waiting to get out. I remember being in between the pontoons of a boat waiting on my turn to get out. Ahead of me were 3 other girls. I remember seeing a catfish float up and thinking that was not right. I could not react before I felt as though I was being restrained. I could not move and I could not speak. I just felt as though I was floating. I think I lost consciousness, because the next thing I remember was being on the dock looking at 2 of the girls that had been in the water. Neither of them had pulses and neither of them was breathing. One of the chaperones was a retired nurse and she began CPR. Our youth pastor followed suit with the other girl. I remember the ambulances coming and taking the girls. One was a 13-year-old girl who had been airlifted to Jackson, Mississippi. The other was about 17, and she was taken by ambulance to Rapids Parish Hospital near Alexandria. As for me and the last girl, we were both taken to the hospital to get checked out, and I spent a total of 23 hours on an IV because some level was high. As you can imagine, it was tough to see 2 of your friends lifeless on a dock. I was born in Mobile, Alabama, and I grew up around docks and water. I had never heard of anything like this before. As of right now, it was almost 2 a.m., and I can't sleep because the faces of the girls still haunt me. I'd really love to talk to someone and see if there's any way that I can help. Financially, I'm a broke college freshman who has moved from home and just wants to be able to do his part to help people. Please contact me if you can. This happened close to the beginning of June 2017. I was with my grandparents at the beach. We all heard some sirens. Sounded just like ambulance sirens. I put it off thinking it was just an ambulance on the road that was nearby. A little while passes. I see a boat with lights on the top driving. I just think it's a person driving their boat, and they have the lights on because it's kind of foggy. Then maybe 5 minutes later, I see a police officer talking to someone. I didn't really know why they were here. Then they came up to us and asked if we had seen a white woman with a light blonde hair in her mid-40s wearing a blue bikini. We say no, and then they explain that the woman and her friend had come to the beach that day. The woman's friend said she had dozed off for who knows how long, and when she woke up she couldn't find the woman. She said the last place she saw her was in the water. There was a riptide warning out for the area as well. This was 4 miles down the beach from where we were. I don't know what happened to her or if she's okay. I look over to our catch pool after a slide we have, which has a different lifeguard at it, and I spot a kid with his parent, both in good condition above the water. Is that him over there? I say, looking back at my friend. Where? Oh, he's over there, I say, pointing. As I say this, I notice that the kid's parent is talking to the lifeguard at the splash pad, and the kid is behind the parent, submerged, active victim. Since I saw this while talking, what I ended up casually saying was, "Oh, he's over there dying." My friend looks over and begins sprinting towards the kid. I hop out of the water and start walking over, maybe because I'm too calm or just been doing this too long to feel like it's an emergency yet. The parent hears splashing from my friend running towards him through the water, looks down at his kid and lifts him out of the water. The lifeguard he was talking to, 2 feet away from the drowning kid, didn't know what had happened until we told him. Stay sharp even when talking to people. Another interesting note is that the dad and kid were literally the only people in the splash pad area that day. I really hoped that they would have seen him, even if I hadn't come out from the guard shack on my break. When I was 9, my father, mother, and I had moved into my grandmother's old house in the countryside. She had died sometime before, and my mother had inherited the house. While my parents, along with my uncle, were unpacking, I had wandered over to the empty pool that was at the very back of the yard. I remember reaching the broken fence before I heard my father. "Samantha, get away from there." I spun around and ran back to where my uncle resided on the back porch. "Why can't I explore near the pool? It's not like I'll fall in," I asked, looking up at my uncle before turning to look back at the far end of the yard. The light from the porch light only leaving a dim light against the broken fence. "There's a man in there," was all he said to me before ushering me back inside. What he told me that night scared the life out of me. I never went back to the far side of the yard again. I was only 9 at this time, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I never found out why he was so scared until many years later. My bedroom window overlooked the backyard, so every time I passed my window, I saw the dark pit that was a pool. One night I took a chance and looked out the window, looking at the pool and the broken fence. I squinted, being too dark to see anything, so I grabbed my torch and opened the window, shining it on the pool. I'll never forget what I saw that day. There was blood starting at the broken fence and a trail leading up to the shed that was just beside the porch. I screamed and dropped my torch, slamming the window shut and throwing myself on the bed. My parents came running in, Dad with a baseball bat and my mom holding a magazine of sorts, demanding what happened. "There's blood going to the fence from the pool," I cried, getting up and grabbing my father's arm and pulling him to the window, picking up my torch and shining it where I had been before. The same blood trail being lit up under the bright light of the torch. My father promised he would go investigate in the morning. When I woke up the next day, my father had told me that he went and looked at the blood trail, and judging from the size of the trail and where it led to, he told me it was probably an animal that had hurt itself on the broken fence, and reminded me what my uncle had told me, to not go near the fence on the far side of the yard. That was the first of many strange things happening in that yard. A week or so after the blood trail, I woke up to find that there was a bird impaled on a spike on top of the fence. My father wasn't home, but as I ventured outside to see where my mother was, I saw her pushing the dead animal off the spike before sweeping it into the empty pool with her broom. "Mom," I called out. Her head snapped around to look at me, her body language showing she was angered by being watched. "Samantha, get inside," she snapped at me. Knowing that if I didn't listen to her I would be in trouble, I ran back inside. She didn't follow until a good 20 minutes later, and I didn't dare ask what she was doing near the pool. Months passed by and I'd constantly see my mother, the same time every day while my father was at work, pushing a new dead animal into the empty pool. Some were foxes that got caught on the small holes of the broken fence, death by starvation. Others were more birds or even stray cats that had fallen victim to the broken fence. I grew used to seeing blood or deceased animals, so whenever I saw something caught in the fence, I told my mother and she just kissed my forehead, told me not to worry about it. One day my father came home from work early as he had forgotten his lunch to find my mother sweeping yet another deceased cat into the pool. From my room I heard my father shouting at her, asking why she was doing this and for how long. I never heard my mother reply, but instead, I heard my father come back inside with the slam of the back door. Then a few moments later, The sweeping continued. I'm 19 now. My parents got divorced quite a while ago for many reasons. My father had moved out to live in a town over, around an hour or so from my mother's house. I saw him quite often and I spoke to him every night on the phone. My mother's health had deteriorated over the years. She had rheumatoid arthritis, causing it hard for her to move around without help. You see, after my father left my mother and I, she stopped sweeping dead things into the pool, as her joints became weak as she refused to see a doctor or accept treatment. She would just sit on the back porch and stare off into the distance, only coming inside to make meals, and when it became dark. One night my uncle had taken my mother away for the weekend to see a doctor, and I was left all alone in the house. I was on Skype with my boyfriend who lived in the city when I heard a large creaking sound coming from my window. I excused myself and got up, opening the window and looking down at the yard, looking for the source of the noise. I grabbed my phone and turned the torchlight on. This is when I saw it. A silhouette of a large hand, curled around the bar of the fence, pulling itself up from what seemed to be the pool. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing. I watched as it stood on the outside of the pool and looked up at my window. Its eyes stood out the most. They shone in the light from my phone, like if you were to shine a light on a dog or cat's eyes. Its silhouette was human-like, but its limbs had been twisted out of shape. Its legs faced aside instead of forward, and its arms were limp by its side. I stared at its face. I wish I hadn't. His face was mangled and bloody like it had been attacked. Its mouth was set in a wide grin. I heard my boyfriend asking what was wrong, and as the creature started running towards the house, I remembered my uncle's words from a decade ago. There's a man in there. The end. Thank you guys for watching and listening to the very end of this video. I greatly appreciate all the comments that you guys send my way each upload. I need people to start sharing on social media. Share with your family, friends, anyone in the horror community. Let them know about Sinful's horror stories. And yet again, if you're not subscribed, I hope you want to at this point. Please enjoy all the content I have uploaded over the last 6 years. Until we meet again, stay sinful.
So, my story is not one where I was the target of somebody else's stalking or harassment, but one where I was the guy who was just at the right place at the right time. And I'm fairly certain that my inadvertent intervention may have saved someone that I'd never met from, well, who knows what. So, this was back in 2015 or 2016. I'm a career tow truck driver, and at this point, I've been towing cars for almost most of my adult life, and will likely do so until I either retire or I pass away, whichever comes first. At the time, I was working for a pretty small towing company with only 2 employees, and we rotated who was on call each weekend. It was my weekend on call, and it was summer, so with people being out and about sort of late and whatnot, I was pretty busy that week. Cleaning up accidents, towing broken cars down, both in the city and off the highway. I was fine with it, as I was paid commission at the time, so the more calls that I did, the more money I made. It was Saturday night, now Sunday morning, and it's around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and like I said, I've been really busy. As such, I'm a bit tired, a little grumpy, and kind of want to just go home when my phone rings. It's an insurance company calling, asking if we can do a tow for one of their customers who was broken down on the side of the highway. The breakdown location they gave me is about 15 miles out of town, which I normally wouldn't have done, but the tow destination happens to be a dealership that's just a couple of minutes from my apartment. I sort of contemplate rejecting the call, but because I'm paid commission, I figure screw it. I can run up and grab this car, drop it off around the corner from my place, then hopefully I can head home and get a couple of hours of shut-eye. So, in the end, I take the call and hop on the highway. The insurance company provided me with the customer's first name, Kara, and gave me a phone number for her. Usually I try to make contact with people who are on the side of the highway to let them know that I'm on my way and give them an ETA. I try calling her a couple of times, but she doesn't answer. Not completely unusual. After a short while, though, I see hazard lights up the way on the shoulder, so I turn on my strobes and start slowing down. As I approach, I notice that not only is there the late model car that I'm looking for, but there's another car on the scene as well that doesn't have its hazards on, but is parked in front of the car that I'm meant to be towing. This is annoying, but not uncommon, as I need to be able to get in front of the disabled car in order to load it up, and sometimes people just don't realize that. But because the other car is there, I instead pull up behind both cars. You do this so that as the tow driver, you're the one that has to make the weird maneuver of pulling off the shoulder and back onto the shoulder, and that the other car just has to drive straight forward on the shoulder. Otherwise, if I pulled up in front, then the other car would have to go around me, and it's just unprofessional and unsafe to make them do that. Standing at the trunk of the late model car, which is now directly in front of me, are a man and a woman. The woman is probably maybe in her early 20s and dressed to the nines for a night out. She's about 5'1" or 5'2". She's wearing tight leatherish or something pants, a halter top, long black hair, very pretty. The man is probably around 5'10" and skinny, maybe 150 to 160 pounds, wearing a dark hoodie and dirty jeans. They're standing very close too, facing each other. She has her arms crossed and he's leaning down talking to her. I step down out of my truck and approach them both and introduce myself. They separate a few feet and I look to the woman and say, "Are you Kara?" And she nods. I say that I'm here for her insurance company and ask what's going on with the car. Immediately the man pipes up and says, "Yeah, it's just having some fuel issues. It's an easy fix. Can you just drop it off at this commuter parking lot? I'm going to fix it up there for her." I'm rather annoyed at this, to be honest, because the commuter lot in question is further up the highway and I'm already 15 miles out of town. Like I said before, I only took this call because it was supposed to be coming back toward my apartment, and I just really wanted to get home at this point. Not only that, but in order to change the original tow destination, I would have to call the insurance company back, wait on hold for who knows how long for a representative, and then on top of that, let them know of the change and try to get them to pay me extra for the deadhead miles back home after unloading. And I really didn't want to do any of this. And thirdly, this is a late model car. I'm no mechanic, but it's new enough for whatever is wrong with it that it's likely covered under warranty anyway, so the dealership is really the best place for it to go anyways. I explain all of this to the guy, but he's just not really having it. He even gets stern with me, saying something like, "Look man, you just need to take the car where I tell you to take it." We go back and forth on this for maybe 60 seconds, and he's just getting madder. And well, you know what, man? You're not the named insured. Kara is. The easy way to settle this is to just ask what she wants me to do with the car, and whatever she wants is what I'll do. Fingers crossed, she'll want to take it to the dealership so I can just get home sooner. I turn to look at Kara to ask her that question, and I don't see her right away. She's no longer standing where she was just a minute ago. She was slightly off to my right. I continue to not see her until I've turned almost all the way around, because now she's standing directly behind me. And by directly, I mean within an inch of my back, arms still crossed. I look down at her and she locks eyes with me, and her eyes are as wide as plates, almost owl-like, and immediately it feels like she's just staring into my soul. She didn't say a word, and to be honest, she didn't have to. I took a step back and did what felt like a double take, I guess. I looked at him, then at her, then at him again, and then back at her. and it slowly started to dawn on me that maybe something just wasn't right. I asked her, "Do you know this guy?" And she ever so slightly shook her head no, and the expression on her face when I asked her that will be forever burned in my skull. I turned to the guy and was like, "Oh, you gotta go, man." Now, I'm not a tough guy. I'm a total beta male, to be honest. If there's such a thing, I guess, and I don't care who knows it. I've got nothing to prove. I'm super averse to confrontation and will run at the first sign of trouble, and I'm not exactly the biggest of guys either. I am, however, what I like to call sturdy, I guess. I'm 5'8" and 240 pounds. I have a bit of a gut, but I also have big thighs and broad shoulders, and people are generally surprised to find out that I weigh as much as I do. And quite honestly, I think that might have been my saving grace for what happened next. Because, without a word, the guy starts to move for Kara, and I move to stay in between them. He tries to push me out of the way by shoving me in my chest, but because I believe he underestimated my weight, only pushed me hard enough to make me take a single step back. Immediately, I took that step forward towards him and body checked him hard as I could really, hard enough to completely knock him over, basically onto his butt. Because we rotated during the back and forth push bit, Kara is now in front of me to my right, somewhat between me and the guy who's trying to scramble to his feet. I reached out and snatched the poor girl up by her wrist, spun her towards my truck and yelled for her to get into the driver's seat, and she does. I turn back to the guy who's standing up again at this point, and he's breathing really hard. He gets right up in my face but doesn't do anything, just breathes at me. I stare him right in his face and, mustering up the best dad voice I can muster, just say, "You need to go." Mind you, I'm shaking now and I'm absolutely terrified. I don't know if he has a weapon, I don't know if he's going to try to fight me, and I don't know what I would do if he did. Like I said, I'm not a tough guy. I really don't know how to fight. I've never been in a fight in my life. But what if I get badly hurt? What if I get stabbed? What do I even do now? I just want to go home, man. I wasn't even going to take this call. All this is running through my head at lightning speed, and after probably around 15 seconds or so, which felt like forever, he just kind of huffs a bit, smiles one of the creepiest smiles that I've ever seen, and starts to back off. He sort of sucks his teeth and rubs his hands together. He slowly walks backwards a few steps and then makes his way to the front of the car, gets in and just drives off. I just sort of stood there for a few seconds, motionless, watching him until I could no longer see his taillights. I got Kara's car loaded up on the tow truck, and as we made our way to the dealership, she told me through tears that her car had shut off while she was driving, and she pulled onto the shoulder and called her parents, because she was on their insurance. Her parents made the call to the insurance company, who eventually dispatched me to her location. While she was waiting, a bit after she made the call, the guy pulled up in front of her and walked up to her passenger side window to try to talk to her, asking if she needed help, etc. And she told him that she was fine, that a tow truck was coming, and she didn't need any help. He apparently persisted, and she tried to tell him off and eventually tried to roll up the window, but apparently he stuck his arm in the window and got the door unlocked and opened the door. In fear, she jumped out of the car, leaving her phone inside, and ran to the back of her car and stayed put there because it was in line of sight of the traffic. Apparently, too, he was really lewd with her, and whenever she tried to go back to the car, he would prevent her from getting in. Several minutes later, I showed up. And honestly, who knows what would have happened had the timing been any different. Her parents were waiting at the dealership when we arrived, and she told them what had just happened. Her parents gave me a $20 tip, which was all the cash that they had on them at the time, and Kara gave me a very tight and clearly heartfelt hug before I left. And after that, I never saw her again. But I tell you what, every guy has daydreamed at some point of coming to the rescue of a pretty girl in trouble, right? Myself included. You think that you're going to be a hero. You're going to slay the dragon and get the girl and ride off into the sunset like the king you are, right? But for me, being in that situation, in that moment, was one of the most terrible feelings that I've ever had. forced into a confrontation that I didn't even want nor was prepared for, not knowing what to expect from a clearly not well-hinged individual. I really did not feel like a hero that night. I felt like a scared little kid encountering a bully on the playground for the first time. If I'm ever in a situation like that again, I don't think I'll ever not intervene, if I'm being honest. But I just really hope that I never have to do that ever again. So, I've spent a lot of my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit that North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, I frequently drive up there and hike and camp. This time, I went up with my family in an RV and stayed with them in the Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off about 10 miles away at the Cold Mountain Trailhead, and I'd planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced in hiking or camping, but I had never camped alone at this point. On top of that, I didn't bring a pistol, something I won't go without now, but anyway, on the way up, the trail was surprisingly strenuous. Not necessarily steep. I've hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like a ton of ups and downs and feeling like it just would never end. Eventually, it began to get darker and I realized that I needed to stop and set up while I still had light. So I stopped about a half a mile short of the summit and figured that I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot, made my food, and went into the tent. At this point, I realized that I hadn't run into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon would be. I have trouble sleeping at the best of times, and usually lay awake for up to an hour trying to sleep. And during this time, I could have sworn that I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the steps. In the end, I just sort of brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull out my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag, just in case. That morning, I woke up and I ate some oatmeal, and as I ate, I looked over at my tent at some point, and I noticed that there was a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries tied with green cord now propped up against my tent. Internally, I was half scared to death, but I quickly packed up my stuff and took off within 5 minutes. And no way was I bothering to go to the summit that day. I headed straight down, and on the way down I realized that there was a pretty heavy fog, and I ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I got lost. I used a compass to eventually reorientate myself and found the trail again. One of the biggest reliefs, let me tell you, and I made my way out there with no other incident. However, I came to find out the same morning that apparently a 27-year-old person died on the same section of trail as me, and it's possible that I would have run into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. And I guess that's the scariest part, knowing that someone knew where I was and watched me, and I had no idea that they were even there.